Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I've lived on Elm Street for over 20 years and it's always been a peaceful neighborhood. Sure, there's the occasional spat over whose garbage cans belong where, but nothing major. That all changed when Karen moved in across the street 6 months ago. From day one, she's been nothing but trouble, constantly complaining about minor issues and sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. We all tried to give her the benefit of the doubt at first, but it quickly became clear she was just an entitled, inconsiderate person. A few months ago, things escalated beyond neighborhood squabbles. It was a Tuesday evening and I was home with my elderly mother, who lives with me. Around 8 p.m., she suddenly started gasping for air and clutching her chest. I quickly realized she was having a heart attack. I called 911 right away and they said an ambulance was on its way. With my mom's condition deteriorating by the minute, I helped her outside to wait for the paramedics. That's when I discovered Karen's shiny BMW parked horizontally across my driveway, completely blocking it. There was no way the ambulance could get through. In a panic, I rushed over and banged on Karen's front door. She took her sweet time answering. When she finally opened the door, I quickly explained the situation. My mom was having a heart attack and her car was blocking the driveway from the ambulance. I begged her to please move it immediately. Karen just glared at me and said, "That's not my problem. I parked there because it's convenient for me. Get your own driveway unblocked." Then she tried to slam the door in my face. I wedged my foot in the doorway and pleaded with her to think of someone besides herself for once and move her car. My mom's life was at stake. Karen just kept refusing, not an ounce of empathy on her face. By now, the ambulance siren was getting closer. I had no more time to waste arguing with this selfish woman. Adrenaline pumping through me, I shoved past her and sprinted into her house looking for her car keys. I heard her screaming at me, but I didn't care. All that mattered was moving that BMW. I finally spotted her keys on the kitchen counter and ran back outside. As expected, Karen was right on my heels, still yelling obscenities. I hurriedly clicked the key fob and was relieved to see the parking lights flash on the BMW. The ambulance was just rolling up in front of the house. I jumped into Karen's car without hesitation. She came running and tried to pull me back out, but I yanked the door closed. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she shouted. I couldn't care less. All I could think about was getting this car moved so the EMTs could save my mom. My hands shook as I adjusted the seat and mirrors. I cautiously backed the BMW down the driveway enough so the ambulance had room to pull in. Karen stood there the whole time, screaming like a deranged toddler, her face purple with rage. As soon as I put the BMW in park, I jumped out and ran to my mom's side. The paramedics were already loading her stretcher into the ambulance. They said I could ride with them to the hospital. Before getting in, I turned to give Karen one last look of disgust. She was still carrying on with her little tantrum. I shook my head and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself. My mom could have died because of your selfishness. I'll be speaking to our homeowners association first thing tomorrow." Karen's tirade continued, but I tuned her out. Nothing was going to bring me down from the relief I felt knowing my mom was finally getting medical care, thanks to a well-deserved dose of karma dished out to Karen. At the hospital, my mom was rushed into emergency surgery. It was touch and go, and I spent agonizing hours pacing in the waiting room. Finally, the doctor came out looking optimistic. The surgery was successful, and my mom was stable, though she'd require monitoring and medication for her heart condition. I was overwhelmed with emotion. My mom was going to make it. As I waited to visit with her in recovery, I replayed the night's events in my mind. I felt validated that I'd stood up to Karen, but also embarrassed I'd broken into her house in a panic. The next morning when I arrived home, a police car was in my driveway. My heart sank thinking Karen had actually called them about the car incident. But it turned out the officer was just there to check on my mom and get my official statement. I explained the medical emergency and Karen's refusal to move her illegally parked car. The officer was understanding and even seemed annoyed on my behalf regarding Karen's behavior. He agreed she was way out of line and said he would have a talk with her about proper parking etiquette and empathy for neighbors in emergency situations. I thanked him profusely for his compassion. Before leaving, he suggested I contact a lawyer in case Karen tried pursuing legal action. After the police left, I pulled myself together and drove to the homeowners association office. I filed a complaint outlining Karen's complete lack of care for others in our community. The HOA manager was appalled and said they would follow up with sanctions based on their policies. I provided a copy of the police report backing up my complaint. Over the next week, reports of Karen's transgressions spread quickly around the neighborhood. Turns out she had been clashing with several other residents ever since moving in. My incident was just the final straw that exposed her true entitled nature. I received a formal notice from the HOA that Karen would be fined $500 for obstructing emergency vehicle access. She would also have to issue written apologies to me and the board, as well as complete 20 hours of community service. Her membership in the association was being reviewed pending further complaints. A few neighbors came by to check on my mom and me after hearing what had happened. They were relieved Mom was recovering well. My best friend insists I speak to her lawyer and file a civil lawsuit against Karen for emotional trauma. I realized I deserved compensation for the anguish her reckless behavior caused. The lawyer determined I had solid grounds for a personal injury lawsuit against Karen. We ended up settling outside of court for a reasonable sum, though Karen refused to admit any wrongdoing. The settlement money went into a medical fund for my mom's care, which provided some peace of mind. In the weeks that followed, Karen remained an outcast in the community. A few more fines eventually led to her threatening to move away. I can only hope wherever she ends up, she'll learn to be less self-centered. For now, the neighborhood is back to being a friendly place. As for my mom, she's gotten progressively better and her heart condition is manageable. She's decided to stay living with me permanently since I'm able to care for her needs. I don't mind one bit. She's my family, and I'm just grateful to still have her around after that awful ordeal. Karen nearly cost my mom her life with her disregard for others, but in the end, the justice system prevailed. I'm sharing my experience as a warning not to let entitled people walk all over you, especially in emergency situations. No one should have to endure what my mom and I went through because of someone else's selfishness. Stand up for what's right. You never know when it could save someone's life. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I was a kid back in the 80s, 2 years out of college, when I moved into an apartment by the shore in NJ. When the cold weather arrived, there was always a few days when the apartment was cold. We would tell the super, and then the heat would start arriving. One year the heat started decreasing in February, and inside the apartment was like in the 50s, and we had to start wearing coats. We told the super about it, and nothing happened this time. We wrote the landlord about it, and still nothing. So we checked with an attorney and learned about warranty of habitability and withholding of rents. So yet another certified letter to the landlord, and we start withholding rents. He files a motion to evict us, and we answer with the Marini defense, depositing the withheld monies with the court. The judge finds in our favor for all the money withheld. We continue to live there because there just aren't many other options as we save for a home. Flash forward to living there for 6 years, on the last lease, because we are about to buy a home. We write in a clause that we can break the lease with 45 days notice in writing, similar to his 45-day clause. They don't notice it because it's slightly obscured on the top left of page 2, so they sign off on it and return it to me. So in the middle of the lease, we give the 45-day written notice, make the rent payments, and leave. They don't return our deposit, so we sue for it, demanding double. They sue us for the remainderment of the 6 months' rent and refuse to return our security deposit. This is no longer small claims court, but we proceed without an attorney anyway. They are expensive. We arrive at the courthouse and court forces a round of arbitration. The arbitrator says we will lose in front of the judge and to pay the rent remainderments. We refuse and wait for the judge. While waiting, the landlord's attorney drops by and asks why we didn't take the arbitrator's advice, so we tell him about the clause we wrote in, and he states he saw it too, and that since it was crossed out, it's not part of the deal. We show him our copy of the lease where it's not crossed out, and his face goes white as a sheet. He makes a call to the landlord, who then offers to properly break the lease with no penalty and return our security deposit in full. We refuse, and we show him the certified letter stating that we would have accepted that deal up until yesterday, but that if you force us to come down to court, we want double damages of the improper withholding of the security deposit. He tries again to reach out to the landlord, but no luck this time. We go to see the judge. He looks at both leases and calls their attorney to the bench. The judge takes our lease and thrusts it toward their attorney and says, "This is the lease in force." Their attorney starts walking around the courtroom like a chick with his head cut off, while I try to laugh as quietly as possible. The judge fines for us for double damages. We receive nothing for a week, and I go back to the courthouse where the clerk says they should pay that judgment immediately, and tells us about chattel execution and gives us that form. A couple of weeks pass, and a check appears from the landlord. Another month passes, and we get a call from the court. They have our money. I told them the landlord had sent a check a while back, so all it good. She tells us that we should have informed the court that we got the money to stop the chattel execution from occurring. The court sent the sheriff to their offices and confiscated office equipment and sold it at auction to satisfy the judgment. They said don't worry, they will just return the money to the landlord. That is the revenge, getting the money and having them experience the abrupt seizing of their assets at their place of business, having it sold at auction, and then having the money returned to them. Major pro-justice. The next one is a petty revenge story. I live in an apartment building that went condo. Most of the owners rent their units out to someone else, so most of the people living here are tenants, not owners. Most of the owners are pretty cool, but some of them really suck and go out of their way to be assholes to the renters. One Karen in particular is just really nasty. She threatened to have me evicted for playing with my son with sidewalk chalk in front of the building. She threatened my neighbor with the cops for playing with his kids with sparklers on the 4th of July. Anytime someone moves in, she tells them they aren't allowed to use the elevator. They are. She once threatened to call ICE on someone's movers because she heard them speaking Spanish. She's terrible. Anyway, this morning I'm walking home and I see her standing out front, so I picked up my pace to get inside before her. I heard her opening the front door just as I was getting into the elevator. As the elevator rose to my floor, I punched all the buttons, top floor first, and worked my way down, then the basement. Have a nice trip, Karen. You're the worst. The next one is a malicious compliance story. The context. I, 35F, live in a big city in Western Europe. After graduating college, I was hired as an office assistant in a big company. Let's call it Happy Place. I did my last internship as a student there, and it went so well that I got hired just a few weeks after getting my master's degree. Over the next 10 years, I worked my way up from an assistant to office manager to head of one of the biggest departments. I was not paid a lot of money, but it was above average and the benefits were great. But the main reason I stayed for so long was the people who worked there. Over the year, I've made quite a few friends there, and by the year 2020, I was one of the most experienced people working in Happy Place. My colleagues often came to me for an advice about how to do this or that, and I also had a great relationship with the big bosses. And the cherry on top was that I had the best boss someone can hope for. Let's call her Maggie. Maggie was 10 years older than me, and she was Wonder Woman. She is nice, professional, cool, helpful, and has a heart of gold. I've worked with her during my whole time at Happy Place, and the last 4 years she was my direct supervisor. I loved her. Then, in 2020, a few things happened almost at the same time, and over the course of 6 months, Happy Place turned into Sad Place. First, the company hired a new HR lady, Karen. She was the worst. She treated everyone below her level of responsibilities, which, as pretty much 99% of the staff, as if they were lesser people, talked down to everyone and constantly made changes in the HR policies. She implemented quite a few new rules which lead to us losing some of the benefits that we liked, like free lunches, paid time off to go to the doctor's office during office hours, etc. But the CEO of the company trusted her for some reason, and soon he stopped taking meeting with the staff, making Karen the only person who could make decisions regarding the staff. Which meant that no one could actually complain about her, and we slowly started feeling helpless. Second, Maggie was promoted to a different field, the one she actually wanted to work in, so I cannot be mad at her for leaving. And she got replaced by Susan as my new supervisor. Susan was cool, but she was my age and with less experience, which did not make much sense. So even though on paper she was the one in charge, I was the one constantly explaining to her how things worked and what needed to be done, while she took the credit. And lastly, COVID. Our line of work was highly impacted by the pandemic, so the whole year 2020 I was working under an enormous amount of stress, taking almost no vacation time, doing my job and some of Susan's job, as at some point she went on a medical leave, and some of my co-workers' jobs, as some colleagues cracked under the tension and quit, but no one got hired to replace them. But despite all of the hard work, I did not receive any pandemic-related bonus, which was weird since some of my coworkers let it slip that they got a €1,000 bonus for achievements during the pandemic, the compliance. So given all the events of 2020 and January 2021, I've decided that enough was enough. When it was time for my annual review, I've decided that I would negotiate better conditions for myself, because as much as I loved my job and the people I've worked for, I couldn't keep working so much for so little pay. As Susan was still on a medical leave, Karen was the one who did my annual review, despite the fact that I've only met her a few times and we've never directly worked together. In preparation for the meeting, I've made a list of the things I've been putting up with and a list of reasons why I should get a slight pay bump. I was asking for a 15% pay increase, but was happy to accept a 10%. It was not about the money. It was about knowing that there was at least a chance that management valued me as an employee, and that I was not just some sucker who did so much for not even a thank you. After making my case to Karen and carefully explaining to her what my job was and what I was actually doing, I asked her the dreaded question. She looked at me, smiled, and said, "OP, I appreciate everything you've been doing for the company, and we value you as an employee, but your responsibilities and your abilities are not worth that much." I was speechless. I admit I was so angry and hurt that I felt tears coming up to my eyes. But I took a deep breath, calmed myself, and said, "Thank you for your input, Karen, but I cannot keep working in these conditions. It's not worth it." Karen rolled her eyes and replied, "Then you can quit, but I will be sorry to see you go." And quit I did. You see, there were two things Karen did not know. First, as explained, I was a highly valued employee with a great reputation and over 10 years of experience in the field. In our field, reputation is important, and for the last 2 years, I've been receiving job offers from competitors. I always refused because I loved working for Happy Place. But since the events of 2020, I started taking interviews, checking what else was out there. And just before my meeting with Karen, I did an interview with Cool Company, who offered me a 60% raise to do the same job as I did for Happy Place. Second, remember how I said I took almost no vacation days in 2020? So by January of 2021, I had over 2 months of paid leave available. I checked with the HR, not Karen, the week before my annual review, and they confirmed to me in writing that I was free to take my vacation days whenever I wanted. So I did exactly what Karen told me to do. I quit. I put in my 2 months notice and took my 2 months vacation, which meant that I came to work for only one day, to clean out my office and say goodbye, before leaving for good. I felt bad because I left so many of my colleagues in a really bad position, since they now had to do my job. But they all assured me that they understood and that they would have done the same thing. After my 2 months paid vacation, I started working at Cool Company, and I've been here ever since. The aftermath. I kept in touch with a few friends from Happy Place, and they regularly informed me of what was going on over there. It seems that me quitting was the push that many of my coworkers needed to also make the final leap and quit. As I said, the conditions went from great to bad since Karen took office. Also, the fact that I quit so abruptly got the attention of the CEO as we had a good relationship. He asked Maggie, who was aware of the whole story with Karen, about it, and she told him the truth. About me not getting the COVID bonus. About Karen speaking down to staff members. About her telling me to quit if I wanted to. The CEO finally opened his eyes and launched an investigation into Karen's actions. He personally did interviews with some staff members and heard stories about her from people from many different departments. He also investigated the COVID bonus story, and it turns out she only gave the COVID bonus to her friends from different departments, and a very generous one to herself. Plus, since I've quit, no one was actually able to do my job, and the fact that Karen was responsible for me leaving made her responsible for the consequences. So after reviewing everything, the CEO decided to terminate Karen's contract. Rumor has it, the whole staff of Happy Place celebrated this joyous occasion. The cherry on top. Last week, my boss at Cool Company walked into my office and said, "OP, you know Jen from HR is retiring soon, right? We did interviews to replace her, and one of the candidates is Karen. She seems competent, but asks for quite a lot of money. You and her work together, right? What's she like? Do you think she deserves to be paid more than we initially offered?" I said, "Boss, you have a few minutes? Great. Let me tell you a story." After hearing my very honest opinion of Karen, Boss Man laughed and said, "Okay, good to know. I think we will tell her that she is not the right fit for us. Thanks, OP." As soon as Boss Man left my office, I sent an email to my friend Lori from HR, who was in charge of replying to candidates. I also told her the story and asked her to keep me informed if there is any development with the whole Karen applies to Cool Company thing. A few hours later, I got an email from Lori. Turns out she copied me to her official reply to Karen. It read, "Dear Karen, thank you for your interest in working for Cool Company. After careful consideration, we regret to inform you that in our opinion, your responsibilities and your abilities are not worth that much." I brought Lori a big chocolate cookie the next day. Thank you all for reading. Have a great day, and remember, don't let Karens ruin your sense of self-worth. Update. The CEO from Happy Place approached me last week to ask me to come back and work for him. He offered me more money but didn't really apologize for what he let happen to me and the entire team. I said no because even though Karen is no longer there, things haven't really changed. At least not for the better. Almost all of the good people from that place have left for other opportunities since my departure, even those who have been there for 20 years. That includes my friend Maggie, who now works with me at Cool Company. I could not be happier. Judging by her LinkedIn page, Karen is still looking for work. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.